So, what does it look like to enter into church as, I guess we've inherited it in American Christianity and, I don't know, kindle fire of relevancy and such.
Yeah.
Not in the, because a lot of people hear relevant and they think guitars,
Yeah. I mean, that's what's so sickening.
which I like guitars, but
We've had 40 or 50 years of arguing about how we do church on Sunday mornings, and we just found hipper, cooler way, actually, and then they don't stay hip for very long, but other ways to do it, and we haven't gotten down to those deeper issues. I mean, if I had hair, I'd tear it out, but so here's what I would say. We have to do two things, and we have to understand these two things are not in competition. They're synergizing. We have to encourage people to start alternative kinds of faith communities that can leap out ahead of existing churches and do things the way they ought to be done, or experiments about the way they ought to be done. Because without those models, the existing churches won't have models to imitate. And so we have to create new models of imitation that are pretty far out there, but that aren't done the way Protestants normally do things. Protestants normally say, oh, you guys are wrong, we'll do it right. It can't be that way. It has to be more like, well, we're going to try this, and if we learn some stuff, we're glad to share it with you, and because we're all in this together. That kind of synergy to me is what we really need. And then the other question is about mainline Protestants.
yeah. So maybe you could give an example of one of those experiments and how a kind of someone that really enjoys their traditional mainline Protestant church could benefit or learn from these other things that were going on. At the end of the question, it was just, what is an emergent church? So,
okay. Well, I travel all the time, so I get to see lots and lots of churches, from cathedrals to these alternative faith communities and everything in between. So, and the thing I'll say is, I mean, I hardly ever see a church that you think, this place has no reason to exist. I mean, almost every place I go, they're doing good things. I think, if you were to have a critique, almost all of them are worried about their future existence as an economic model, keeping the building going, keeping the bills paid, and so on. And that's not so much, I mean, that's a temporary problem, because we built an economic model over the last few hundred years that probably is not sustainable, just like travel agencies aren't,
That's funny. That's a funny analogy. Very good.
or phone booths,
Yeah.
or the post office.
Yeah.
The post office is a great organization. They're doing a fantastic job. It's not their fault that somebody invented email, and Facebook. So, that's a temporary problem that's going to get worked out. But I'll just tell you that probably my favorite churches that I visited have been in Latin America. And I just, partly because of the people who've invited me, but I've just seen wonderful little congregations, usually Pentecostal, who got the memo about the kingdom of God, that the message of Jesus is about making a difference in this world, starting with the people at the bottom. And I've just seen some beautiful congregations that found ways to live out their faith in very grassroots ways. But shoot, they're all over. And when those exist, it lets other churches see, oh, this is what we could do. This is possible. And I think we're right on the verge of, here in the U.S., of a very good period of experimentation. And I think that a lot of the best examples of it are going to be for mainline Protestant denominations, because all indications are that on the evangelical and Pentecostal charismatic side of Christianity, things are going to contract. We're not going to let those gays in. We're not going to let women be leaders. We're not going to accept evolution, or maybe Pat Robertson will, but
November 12th, 2012 was a beautiful day.
But right when he does something that seems a little bit sane, then he just said that Obama's a socialist who's trying to destroy the country. So anyway, the poor guy. But all indications are that the institutional Catholic Church is constricting and probably will continue to do so in the short and mid-range future. But I mean, but mainline Protestants have had 50 years of numerical decline, and you might criticize them for not being quicker on the uptake, but the great thing is almost all mainline Protestant leaders that I know, they know that the future is going to be different from the past, and there's really creative thinking going on and openness to lots of new possibilities.
Right, how do you balance that with the fact that we have such an aging population and that change is hardest for us as we get older and we love hanging on to the tradition and kind of more concerned about what it looks like than what it really means in our hearts. So,
well, I mean, that's the battle in the mainline Protestant world, isn't it? That's really the battle.
Yes, it is.
I don't want to violate anybody's privacy, but I think this is fair for me to say. I'm friends with and know a lot of the heads of communion in the Protestant, mainline Protestant world. And there's a question I ask, I've never asked this of Catherine Jefferts Schori in the Episcopal Church, but I've asked this of a lot of bishops in the Episcopal Church, and I've asked it of UCC leaders and VOC leaders, and I've asked it of a whole lot of leaders. Here's the question. What percent of your current churches in your denomination do you think will go out of business in the next 20 to 30 years? And so far, I have never, this surprised me, I've never had anybody say less than 30. The most common answer is 30. And I've never had anybody say 20. So they know that there are a whole lot of churches that's how they feel. And I hate to say it, but in the mind of a lot of older pastors, the idea is, let's just keep this thing going till I retire.
yeah.
And in a lot of congregation leaders, it's and lay people,
And lay
it's
leaders, that's right.
keep the thing going till my
Has he
feet.
met our church?
Yes.
And
Can we record that to show?
Yes. Can we show our lay leadership that little snippet there?
so it's really and the truth is, if you think that way, unless you have a huge endowment, you'll go out of business. And even more tragic, you'll wake up when all the young people are gone, and so that's a very common story. But the flip side of that is that those 30% of congregations that are going to go out of business, here's the two choices they have. They either will just sputter along, and let's say as of today, a congregation has, let's be very conservative, $500,000 of assets. I mean, there probably aren't many churches that have less than $500,000 in assets just because they're property, and facilities. So let's say $500,000 in assets. So over 20 years, they could
Sustain.
they could wear out, they could use up all of those assets, so that when they go out of business 20 or 30 years from now, they have zero assets. They might even have some debt, right? Or 5 years from now, when maybe they have $475,000 in assets, maybe they could say, you know what? Why don't we go out in a blaze of glory? Why don't we liquidate? Why don't we find a way to downsize? And why don't we try to make that asset available for the church of tomorrow? And I think that really can happen. It is happening in a few places.
Resurrection.
It's resurrection. It's recycling. And I think there are more and more churches that once they learn that that's an option and that it's not failure, it's actually a great success, say, wow, we've had 80 years. Wow, we've had 100 years of great ministry. And now we can take what we've accumulated to seed something very new and powerful. But just before I sound too rosy, I was talking about this once. Here in California, a couple years ago. And a denominational official of a denomination I won't mention came up to me and said, oh yeah, you want to know what we're doing? He said, we're liquidating, we're selling off our buildings. And those urban buildings, he says, they're just going to tear down the building, but the land is worth millions. And we take all that money and we put it in our retirement fund. So the more churches we close, the more job security we have. And I looked at him, I said, that's evil, man. And he said, yeah, it is.